Today, we have a fantastic guest, Kemp, the CEO and co-founder of Renewable Energy.
I was a part of a very early experiment to find out whether or not hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling was going to get exported around the world.
And what they do is, Renewable is a deep tech company that converts the millions of idle oil and gas wells in the United States into flexible, long-duration mechanical batteries.
Depending on who you ask, there's anywhere between 50,000 and 500,000 orphan wells. And those are the worst case scenario because now no one's looking after them. They are lost sheep, no owner. No one is ready for the orphan apocalypse. So I'm over here sort of waving my flag. So the state is like really behind us, and we're so flattered to be in that position. Most mature oil fields have a ton of electrical infrastructure in them, and every field in the United States is mature.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast. I'm Silas Maynard, your favorite clean tech headhunter. All right, let's get into it. Today, we have a fantastic guest, Kemp, the CEO and co-founder of Renewable Energy. And what they do is, Renewable is a deep tech company that converts the millions of idle oil and gas wells in the United States into flexible, long-duration mechanical batteries. I said millions. It's probably about a million or hundreds of thousands at least. So I don't remember the exact number, but it's a lot. And they are a bit of an earlier stage company, which we don't necessarily usually talk to. I think they're about 6 employees in total. But given the need for grid flexibility right now and the fact that they are working on a mechanical energy storage, I thought it'd be quite interesting to have them on because I really haven't seen this particular technology cross my desk before. So I thought it was interesting to talk about it and get it out there. Now, it's very interesting because Kemp comes from a background in mechanical and energy engineering. And then he actually worked for Shell for 5 years before founding Renewable. And we ended up spending time asking him a couple of different things. But number one, how he learned about the hundreds of thousands of abandoned oil wells out there. He walks us through the simplicity of their mechanical energy storage technology. He covers their business model, and they talked a bunch about talent and hiring challenges, as well as finding his co-founder. So some pretty interesting insights there. I think a lot of the early stage founders will relate to it. Before we start, a quick shout out to the sponsors who make this show possible. First, we have Climate Finance Solutions, your first call whenever you're looking to apply for grant funding. They have helped clean tech startups raise $1.6 billion since 2020, that's billion with a B, and have a 90% success rate at winning the funds that they apply for. Secondly, we've got my company, EarthSearch. We are a full-service recruitment firm helping clean tech startups build and implement differentiated talent attraction systems that give you an unfair advantage over your competitors. Reach out to learn how. And finally, do not forget to register for the upcoming Hack Summit at New Lab in New York City. That's happening December 10th and 11th. There's going to be roughly 500 founders, investors, and ecosystem supporters in the climate deep tech space. And several of our past guests are actually going to be some of the main speakers there. We're going to be there creating content, so we encourage you to come as well. You can register in the description. So without any further delay, let's get into the episode. All right, welcome to the podcast, Kemp. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here, Silas.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate you making the time to do this. I think what you guys are building is quite fascinating. So I'll give just kind of a bit of an intro here. So I'm here with Kemp, the CEO and co-founder of Renewable Energy. Nice play on words there. I like that. And your education is in mechanical engineering and energy engineering, and then you ended up working with Shell for about 5 years, and then now you're building a company. So I'm just kind of curious, how did this happen? How did this come about?
Yeah. So, like you said, I was working for Shell. I was actually living in Argentina working for Shell. And I was a part of a very early experiment to find out whether or not hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling was going to get exported around the world. This was 2016 when I got sent there.
Really?
So the shale gale, as some people call it, started around 2010. So it was a pretty quick turnaround to say, hey, we can do this in the United States. Can we do this elsewhere? And other formations that have similar geology. And so packed up, flew to Argentina on my 27th birthday on a one-way ticket, lived in a little town called Neuquén. But the short answer was like, no, basically. No, it wasn't going to scale up fast. And then they tried it in a bunch of other places, not Shell, I mean the industry at large. They tried it in Poland and England and South Africa and just didn't work. And not because the people or the geology or the regulations were particularly bad.
So can you tell me more? Sorry, I didn't want us to get too bogged down on this point, but can you tell me more about that point you mentioned about the empty oil wells being the biggest liability or biggest kind of bad thing that the oil and gas industry has left behind? I don't understand if I got the point there.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating demographic. of wells in the United States, there's only about 900,000 active wells in the US. About 700,000 of those wells are what we call stripper wells, which means they make less than 15 barrels a day. Another way of saying that is they're hanging on for dear life to active status. Then there's about 2 million idle oil and gas wells, which means they just sit around and do nothing. And then, depending on who you ask, there's anywhere between 50,000 and 500,000 orphan wells. And those are the worst case scenario because now no one's looking after them. They are lost sheep with no owner. At least the idle wells have a responsible party who's vowing to clean up the well someday. And so my argument there that the idle well problem is one of the biggest footprints of the oil and gas industry is that it's just an insane quantity of wells that are sitting around doing nothing. And if you wanted to do the math on like the actual footprint of an idle pump jack, I think it would run way past refineries or even pipelines or anything like that.
You're talking about the emissions coming from those idle wells.
I'm talking about their actual footprint on the earth.
Oh, okay, got it.
So the emissions that come from idle wells is not terribly high. Certainly nothing compared to like what comes out of all the cars in a given country. But in terms of like impact on the earth, we're talking about an insane quantity of literal footprint.
And what are they like? What's the situation with those? Are they going to have to close them? What's the regulations around that? Because I understand there's some states are different, but what's going to likely happen with those if something else doesn't happen?
Yeah, this depends on your trust in humanity a little bit, but every well has to get plugged and abandoned. Morally, philosophically, every well should get plugged and abandoned, inclusive of orphan wells. That's a little bit harder nut to crack, the orphan well problem, because it's going to have to be your money and my money. It's going to have to be taxpayer money. But the law states that every active and idle well that still has an owner must get eliminated, which the industry term for is plug and abandon. Now, the rules vary because most of these wells are regulated by the state that they're in. There's very few wells on federal land, so it's really not a federal issue, it's a state issue. But without fail, whether we're talking about Oklahoma or California, every regulator says you must plug and abandon, eliminate every well, no matter what. They just vary on the timing and the nature of what it means to eliminate a well.
And so what does that typically look like when they plug it? I don't understand what that looks like. Can you explain for me?
Yeah, so it looks, in the most basic terms, filling the well full of cement and cutting its head off and burying it.
Wow. That's a lot of cement, right?
Yeah, so for shallow wells, operators will often just fill the whole thing. If it's a really deep well, like 10,000 feet, then we're talking about like 200-foot length cement plug. So it's not literally, you don't literally fill every single well full of cement all the way from top to bottom. But a lot of people don't realize that wells are relatively small and how narrow they are. Like a typical well is about yay wide. It's about 5.5 inches wide. So they're very, very narrow, very deep. So we're not talking about, like, don't picture a water well or like a, stoned
it's
in
not like it's
cavern.
It's not like it ends up opening and it's huge. So, okay, but the thing I'm trying to understand is, are the companies who have these, are they hesitant to go do this because it costs? Like, does it cost a lot to do that? Like, what's the implications from a financial perspective there?
Yeah, so about 25,000 wells get plugged and abandoned every year, which sounds like a lot. That's a meaningful amount. It's about $3 billion worth of expense. But measured up against 2 million plus the 900,000, we're talking about more than 100 years at that pace to eliminate all the wells. So that's the pace that's happening today. But yeah, oil and gas companies are hesitant to do it because it doesn't make them any money. They're a business like any other business. They want to make money. They want to turn their dollars into more dollars. And spending money on plug and abandonment is turning dollars into no dollars.
I see. And they're not getting like heavily fined for not doing it?
That depends on the state. States like California will issue out some pretty steep fines. More red states, less so.
Okay, got it. Now, this brings us to obviously what you're working on. Can you tell us a little bit more about your technology and what you're proposing here to solve this issue you've been talking about?
Yeah, one of the questions you asked me just a second ago is a good lead in, and that's like, well, what happens? And so one of the scenarios that I have dubbed is the orphan well apocalypse. And what I mean by that is the demographics we just described, 900,000 active, 2 million inactive, let's call it 100,000 orphan. If any portion, even 50% of those idle wells become orphan wells, now we're talking about another million orphan wells, that is a truly disastrous scenario. We'd be talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that the government would have to spend. So back in Biden's term, he threw $4 billion at the problem. It's a $433 billion problem. So no one is ready for the orphan apocalypse. So I'm over here sort of waving my flag, saying like, hey, we're kind of careening towards this cliff instead of just letting this process trickle down, active to idle, idle to orphan. Let's repurpose some of these wells. Not all of them are, Swiss cheese down there. A lot of them are very strong, very intact, very safe, very repurposable. They can have a very long life ahead of them as energy storage. And so that's sort of my cause, is to prevent the orphan well apocalypse. We should be repurposing wells, giving oil and gas companies an alternative to just throwing money down a well.
This episode is brought to you by Climate Finance Solutions, the firm helping climate tech companies win the major government grants that drive their scale and impact. Since 2020, they've won over $1.6 billion in public funding for their clients, with a 90% success rate on the dollars that they've applied for. Their team has also helped win more than 500 million euros in European funding and managed over $275 million in grant projects. With a global team of 27 experts, CFS supports climate innovators through every stage of the funding lifecycle, from strategy to proposals to project execution. They also have a grant identification platform that enables real-time monitoring and custom matching of opportunities with alerts as new grants are released. If you're a climate investor, accelerator, or ecosystem builder, you can even join their partnership program to unlock pro bono support for your portfolio companies. Learn more at climatefinancesolutions.com. All right, back to the show. Got it. Quite literally. Yeah. So, okay, got it. That makes sense. So then how does your technology work that you're going to solve this? Like what's the mechanism for that?
Yeah, it's relatively simple. We call it mechanical energy storage. There are a few other types of mechanical energy storage in the world. Ours is relatively unique in that it's in an oil well. But the basics of it are the same. And that is you move something heavy up and down. So we use a weight, a winch, and a wire. The weight moves up and down inside the well. I was saying a well is, somewhere between 10 and 5 inches wide. So our weight is, in the case of our actual pilot operation, it's 3.5 inches wide. It's 2,000 feet long, and it weighs 30,000 pounds. And it's connected at the top with a 1-inch wire rope that goes up the well, around a big wheel, and then over to a big regenerative winch. A regenerative winch is just a winch that's designed to operate both ways. Most time people think of a winch like on the front of your Jeep Wrangler. It's meant to pull, right? Well, there are winches out there that can pull, and they can also let the line out and make electricity that way. So when the weight's at the top of the well, remember 30,000 pounds, 2,000 feet long, it's got a bunch of potential energy. And when we let it, it starts descending down the well. And that's pulling the wire rope off of the winch, spinning it backwards if you want to think about it that way. And that's pushing power to the grid. You're basically spinning a motor backwards, turning it into a generator. And then when electricity prices are cheap, we pull power from the grid and we reel the weight up towards the surface, sort of doing what you would expect winches to do normally, which is lift things.
Wow. So that means it's extremely simple to understand what you're doing. Like I love anything that's mechanical. I know whenever we talk about chemical engineering or biology on the show, like I'm always like, all right, can you make it simple for me? This makes it. This is quite simple. So I guess probably the cynical take and the next question in most people's minds would be, all right, well that's cool, but how are you going to protect your moat if you do this?
Yeah, we didn't invent some new material that we've got, an iron grip around. So when we talk about moat, we talk about it in a sort of a three-legged stool. Yes, you can patent a weight moving up and down in a well, and we did. But the name of the game in patents is to both be broad and defensible. And that one's defensible, it's just not broad. So the other components of the technology leg are that we've done some pretty good math to know exactly the size of the weight, how long it should be, how wide it should be. So that's a little bit more defensible. But sort of that leg more or less stops there. And then legs number 2 and 3. Number 2 is also technical, and it deals with the way to make these wells work in unison, which is sort of instrumental in being valuable to the grid. If the grid needs 1 hour of duration, and we've got, let's say, 100 wells in a given area, then we could lower all the weights at the same time, simultaneously. So that's all the power we've got stored in 1 hour. And then the grid turns around and says, you know what? Starting tomorrow, I need somebody to fill a 100-hour duration request. Well, we could charge our 100-hour battery by raising all the weights in 1 hour. So come the next day, we've recharged our 100-hour battery in 1 hour, and then we operate the wells perfectly simultaneously. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you get the idea. And no other energy storage technology can do that. They can't switch from 1 hour to 100-hour on a 24-hour basis and do it all at the same round trip efficiency and have zero self-discharge between when you charge and when you're ready to discharge. So there's some pretty cool technology aspects of what we build. It's not just like mediocre energy storage that is solving two problems at once. It's like amazing energy storage solving two problems at once. So that's technology leg number 2. And then leg number 3 is more on the social license to operate, and that's how we monitor the wells. Right? Because this is a state-by-state issue, we got to make sure that those people in charge of making sure the wells are no longer a threat to the environment feel warm and fuzzy about what we're doing. In order for them to feel warm and fuzzy about what we're doing, we need to tell them that, like, we're watching these wells with an eagle eye. And if anything goes wrong with them, we'll know right away. Here are the ways we do it, A, B, and C, and D. And if you have any questions, like we'll report what's happening to these wells so that you can have more insight into your idle wells than ever before.
And is that, from your experience so far, has that data point been a big selling point for your customers?
I was literally just on the phone with a regulator, and it's so important that it was actually written into the bill that we passed as law that we will monitor these wells this way. So it was one of the key components of the legislation that we are now turning into regulation.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's helpful to note. So, and then I guess what I still would like to cover is, how do you guys make money? What's the revenue model here?
Yeah. So the bill I was just referring to, this is something that we've got to do. Either I pass a bill or use existing regulations that allow for an oil and gas company to count this conversion as another means of elimination. So, like I said, 25,000 wells get plugged and abandoned or eliminated every year. And so what we do is we say, look, regulator, we're going to plug the well, we're going to monitor it. It's really not an oil and gas well anymore, truthfully. It's just a deep hole in the ground that we turned into energy storage. And because we're going to watch it so closely and the well is plugged, this should count as another means for an oil and gas company to satisfy the quota that you put on them for how many wells they need to eliminate every year. So you, Silas, you own 500 wells in Colorado, and the regulator comes to you and says, you need to plug 50 of them next year. You need to eliminate 50 of them. And then I meet with you and I'm like, look, Silas, I know that the regulator said 50. I've already looked at the 50 that you're considering. I think 20 of them are suitable for conversion at a lower price point than what you were going to spend to do the elimination normally. And you get to keep the difference. I'll charge you a fee, a turnkey solution. I'll do all prep. I'll change the well over for you. And then if you're interested, you can get a slice of the energy storage revenue. That will change the economics up front, but it really just gives operators, oil and gas companies, another opportunity to sort of jump on the transition bandwagon by letting them get some money via our energy storage services that we sell to the grid on idle wells that were previously making them no money. Or in some cases, they were having to pay fees on.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. So if the regulator did tell them, hey, you got to shut these down, or you got to take care of these 50 this year, and they don't, they're going to get some sort of fine or fee on that?
Yeah, the state regulators vary on what that looks like. California's, I'm pretty sure it's if you don't do the wells that you say you're going to do, then you lose the opportunity to put wells in this program that gives you more time to plug and abandon them, to eliminate them. So basically, you kind of lose the privilege to play nice. Then the regulators kind of like, okay, well, now we're going to fine you, and you're going to plug and abandon a whole lot of them right away, instead of giving you, a time frame to do it.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like there's some mafia dealings going on there. I can understand that.
The guy with the badge shows up at your house.
But it's like, they really should. You would assume it's like, hey, there's just like a standardization, but it's like, if you suddenly piss us off, we're gonna make you go do a bunch more. Otherwise, it's gonna be nasty.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes sense. That's helpful. So to get that correctly, so the you guys are gonna generate revenue with the abandoned wells, and you'll split a percentage of that with the oil well provider, or the original owner.
Yeah.
And they're also paying up front for the hardware?
Yeah. Yep. Well, yes, in a sense, they help us pay for the hardware. We don't sell them the hardware, at least not in the normal business model. We could do that. We could sell them the hardware just like they buy pump jacks, which are, the nodding donkey things. So we're pretty flexible on the way this all moves forward from a dollars and cents standpoint.
Yeah.
But the value is a new means for satisfying your elimination quota and energy storage services. So you can think of us as
Yeah.
like a service company. We actually sell 2 services for every well. The opportunity to do something at a lower cost that is equal to whatever the regulator asks you to do, and energy storage services.
All right, clean tech founders, let's be honest. You need to move fast. It's 2026 and you cannot hesitate. You can't have things dragging you down or slowing you down. So why are you putting off the most critical thing that you can do to help you grow? And that is hire the best talent. We've heard it time and time again on this podcast. The best talent is what helps you grow. The new year is here, and every week that you miss out on hiring that head of sales, that mechanical engineer that you've been looking for some time, you are letting somebody else eat your lunch. It is 2026, and for clean tech startups, it is currently survival of the fittest. You need the best people, and you need them now so that you can grow your company to where you need to get to your next fundraising round. And you need a recruitment partner who's going to match your energy and not going to slow you down. That's me and my firm, Earth Search. We work as an integrated recruitment partner only with clean tech companies to hire their US talent, and we can help you with engineers, sales, co-founders, anything that you need, any talent in the US. We know your industry, we know your targets, and we can deliver. If you've been listening for some time, you know that for 5 years now, we have been having conversations with the leading clean tech entrepreneurs in this past decade. We, as a result of this podcast, have been able to get into rooms that other clean tech recruiters have never entered. And our network isn't just a bunch of resumes. Because of this podcast and these relationships, we know the people who have been the movers and shakers to actually build the most successful clean tech companies in the past decade. You will not find more value in another recruitment partner. That we are confident of. We deliver proven talent faster and cheaper than traditional search firms. And just for you guys, for listeners of this podcast, until the end of January, we are running a promotion to kickstart your hiring in 2026. If you commit to 3 or more searches before February 1st, 2026, you will get $5,000 off your first search with us. That is in addition to the already massively discounted services that we offer on a regular basis. And don't wait, because we are only offering this to 3 companies. So if you'd like to get the conversation started, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or email me at silas@earthsearch.com. That's ERTH search.com. Again, Earth with no A, ERTH search.com. And we'll get the conversation started. Again, we're only offering this to 3 companies because they only have so much bandwidth. We look forward to working with you to build a team of A players. Yeah. And then the reason why you were able to make money on that, just so if anybody's unfamiliar, which we talked about a lot, so you should be, but it's that you're able to charge the wells, charge the batteries, if you will, or lift up the weight during cheap energy cost times. And then you discharge the energy when there's a lot of it needed on the grid. I would assume that well, actually, I shouldn't maybe assume this. Like, how are you guys able to get interconnected to the grid? Is there usually power infrastructure right at the point of this location?
Yeah, great question. The short answer is yes. Most mature oil fields have a ton of electrical infrastructure in them, and every field in the United States is mature. We're not finding new fields, so there's no real truly stranded field disconnected from the world in every way. Now, there are some wells out there that have no electrical infrastructure. I don't mean to make it sound like it's 100%, but it's a high percentage. And if a well is out there in the middle of nowhere with no electrical infrastructure, we just don't even bother. The presence of electrical infrastructure is one of 7 criteria that we filter wells by.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because I don't think you're gonna be interested in building a long transmission line just for a handful of wells or a handful of batteries.
Yeah, nobody can build any transmission at all, truthfully. We're an exception to the rule. That's a whole other soapbox about what the future of the United States grid looks like.
Do you think that if people start to utilize these kind of abandoned assets, like in the case of oil wells, do you think that we're going to see the grid basically, I don't know, mature in a way that will be all right? Or do you still think we're going to have just severe issues over the next couple of decades, given the challenges of increasing demand?
Yeah, this is a great question. My favorite little refrain here is the grid will either get flexible or it will fail, especially in the face of the rising demand that you just mentioned. My prediction is that the only way we will arrive at flexible and not failure is if we repurpose everything we possibly can. We're not building any more transmission, which means we can't really add branches to the tree. The tree is just what it is. The skeleton is what it is. The bones are not changing. So we got to repurpose what's already connected to the body, what's already connected to the grid. Anybody who says things like, "Oh, energy storage that's fixed in oil wells is a bad idea because you need to put energy storage wherever you want. And my response is no one is putting anything anywhere they want because
Yeah, it all has to do with interconnection points, right? If you
right,
don't have that, you're cooked.
yeah. So it's sort of a false comparison in that the idea that you can put a lithium ion battery wherever you want, it's just not true. You got to put it where the interconnection is. So back to your original question, I'm an optimist. I think we'll make it. I want my technology to be a part of it. We are by no means like the silver bullet. Not enough energy storage to handle all of the U.S.'s energy storage needs, but we could be a pretty valuable piece of what the future.
So it sounds like it's a relatively substantial amount. And the thing I wanted to go back to was, are you seeing that oil and gas companies are actually quite interested in picking up a solution? Like, what is the interest level been from them? Because I don't talk to people from the oil and gas industry, so I really don't know. Are they interested in the innovation? Do they actually care that much about the actual the additional revenue? Like, what does it tend to look like?
Yeah, there's sort of two driving components to oil and gas interest. In a coincidental wave of change about 5 years ago, a lot of the more blue states directed their regulators to move away from what they were doing previously, which was more or less the mission of fostering development, i.e., let's make more oil, and into let's steward the environment, let's shut down oil and gas companies. So when I come to them and I'm saying like, hey, the regulator is cool with this, they're kind of like, I don't buy it. I don't believe that. You're gonna have to show me. You're gonna have to pass a bill. You're gonna have to get the governor to sign something. Like, you're gonna have to do a lot to convince me that the person who's sort of been beating me up for the last 5 years is going to give me a new option. So we kind of have to overcome some of that bias. They're kind of got their heads down. They're ready to do plug and abandonment work, and not believe that the regulator that's sort of been a frenemy is ready to be on.
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
Yeah,
but once you can kind of point out to some of the success or some of the proof there, they tend to buy into it.
yeah. I mean, like, we just won a $5 million grant from the California Energy Commission, so the state is like really behind us, and we're so flattered to be in that position. And then we won a little bit more money from Kern County, which is where I'm based, which is essentially the oil field area of California. And so the state's behind us. We bring that sort of good news to the operators who have a long storied history of being very community forward. So we sort of start weaving this story together like, this is not as alien to you as you think it is. Like, this is the type of thing that you've been doing. You funded this playground down the road. Like, this is the same kind of stuff. It's all good social license to operate type work. And the other one is oil price. Oil price is low. The president wants to keep it low, and that means these oil and gas companies are very interested in anything that can
Generates more revenue.
generate more revenue or cuts costs.
I wasn't sure how much of it was like the cost cutting side of things versus the income, right?
Yeah. I'll be perfectly clear that the value to the oil and gas company is the money we save them compared to what full elimination would look like if they chose that path. The energy storage revenue is relatively small, mostly because our system is relatively small. Each well is about 40 kilowatt hours, and we take an hour to discharge, so 40 kilowatts, 40 kilowatt hours. But the name of the game is scale it up, do this in thousands and thousands of wells.
Yeah, and then of course the core point there you mentioned this earlier would be the orchestration between them, so they're all working together. Correct. If
That's
you
right.
don't have that, it's kind of, I wouldn't say pointless, but it would be very it wouldn't be as helpful.
Yeah, you are leaving way too many features off the table.
Yeah.
Coordinating them is like a network effect.
Yeah.
Every well that can talk to its brother makes each of those wells more valuable than one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It makes sense. I want to shift a little bit. So I'm very curious, in this early days of starting the company, how did you end up finding your co-founder?
Yeah, sort of divinely dropped into my lap. We were in the same program at Stanford, and we were sort of on the old side of the grad student demographic. We were both 28 at the time, and so I was like, "You, me, let's be friends." And so we were just buddies for the first year, and then this idea came along, and I was telling him about it, and he was like, "Oh, that sounds so cool! I want to work on that." And I was like, "Well, I think you're a genius, so let's do this." So that was how that happened. Stanford put us together.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is a very common thing. This is like one of the for founders, it tends to be one of the most hypothetically most valuable things about any like educational institution is that you can find your co-founders there, especially because it's a sort of magnet that attracts people. Is it just the two co-founders, or have you brought in others along the way?
Oh, we have other employees for sure. We have 4 other employees, 3 engineers and a data scientist. So that's the whole company right now, 6. We are trying to hire about 3 more roles currently.
And how did you find the other employees so far? Because I'm always curious. Like at the very early days, I would like you to just again, everybody knows listening to me. I'm a talent guy, so I'm always curious as a founder. Like this is your first company. What were your thought process when you're going out to hire those talent, and how did you end up finding them? And any, I guess you say scars or lessons from that.
Yeah, there were a few gyms that got away because we didn't play the game quite right. I don't mean in a combative sense, like we weren't on top of it. We didn't present, we didn't sell the potential employee on renewal. So those were the scars we gained. Was like, hey, if you really think somebody's great, then don't stop until you put all your best cards in front of them and then let them decide.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, we did it on a budget the first time around. We used Workable and Teamable combined to Teamable to hunt and Workable to manage. And then, yeah, everybody that we found were at existing companies and or came from our network. Really, 3 of them were cold in the sense that like we didn't know them beforehand or know anybody that knew them. Teamable found them, recommended them to us. We interviewed them. We went through a few interviews, and then we ultimately made them an offer. And then the last hire actually came sort of through our network, actually through INREL. One of the grants we won prior to the grant I mentioned earlier was about $3 million through the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA-E, but it was in conjunction with INREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And yeah, one of the scientists there at INREL said, like, I know somebody you should talk to for your data scientist position. And we said, okay, tell us who it is. And then we interviewed that person, and we had a few other candidates, but the one that came from in-network was the best.
It's fascinating that 3 of the people you didn't already know, because that's not at all. Again, I shouldn't say it at all common, but it's not what I've seen most of the time happen. It's usually that there's some sort of network through the school. Usually, there's some other people, other students that they'll bring on. So
Yeah.
I'm fascinated to hear that.
Is that like, in network, hire people and Stanford is great. It cranks out a lot of computer scientists, not a lot of mechatronics engineers and electromechanical engineers.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more dirty hand work.
Yeah.
And not to say there aren't brilliant mechanical engineers that go to Stanford. I'm sure there are. But it's just, it's not their niche necessarily.
It's not necessarily what they're known for, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a university you go to drop out to start a company.
Yeah. If we had gone to MIT, maybe things would have been different or something like that.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. I really think it's interesting, like choosing the location to build your company. I don't know if you guys intentionally stayed in California to build this or not, but it changes drastically the the culture and the way the company grows when you do choose different places, right? Like Boston and that whole area is just filled with deep tech startups right now. I know there's a lot of in the EV charging hardware space. There's a lot of stuff going on in the Mid Atlantic, and there's just these pockets of places around the country. And I just maybe you have any thoughts of this, like when you guys were deciding, was it just like, hey, we're based here, we're gonna stay here? Like, did you have any thought process about that?
No, we cheated big time. We're still cheating technically. We didn't pick a place. We have one person who lives in the California Central Coast, one person lives in Northern California, one
Oh,
person
so
in
you're all over the
LA,
place.
2 in Denver, and I'm in Bakersfield, which is Central Valley. But it's a prescient question because my co-founder and I are like, we can't keep doing this, right? I mean, best practice is that the engineers are together. So what do we do? And if we don't have our mind made up, how do we hire people without our minds made up? And so, for better or for worse, we've just decided we're going to power through, try to find great people, and then we'll worry about where we plant the company after that. Or at least,
In some cases, I think that's the best thing, but it does have challenges. But I also, it's like, hey, we got to move forward. We
right,
can't hold things up, you know.
right. Yeah, we want to find the great people who are passionate about what we're doing. And if we have to move here or there, I've packed up and moved. So is my co-founder. That's just part of the process. If they're unwilling to do so, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah.
We got to put butts in seats and do stuff because we got all this work coming down the pipeline.
So how did you know it was time to hire the first non-founder engineer, not non-founder basically in the first place? Like, did you guys just get the idea proved out and then win a grant and say, okay, now we need some other hands? Like, how did that work?
More or less. Stephan's my co-founder. We bootstrapped, we stayed very lean early on, enough to build a prototype that was not commercial scale. So I mentioned that The one that we have operating now is 30,000 pounds. We built one that's 3,000 pounds. We still put it in a well. But it was he and I in hard hats and steel toe boots in the field on two different wells, one in Texas and one in California. And, sort of scratching and clawing our way until we got enough evidence to win that $3 million grant and then go raise a seed round of about $3 million as well. And then after that, it was like, well, it's obvious what we need to do because it's what we promised the RPE grant we were going to do, which was build a commercial scale device. And we were like, well, we definitely can't do it between the two of us. So let's go out and hire a team of engineers.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, I guess that is. I haven't dug into this too often on the show, but that does make sense. It's like you have the one downside. I guess you could say downside with the grants is that you have certain commitments that you have to go then meet. In some ways, maybe it's a downside. Maybe it's actually an upside because you have a very clear objective to work towards, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming it's in most cases like, hey, you've completed this. Now you're going to get more funding, or what is the process after that? Do they usually have additional funding to help you get to the next level in many cases?
Yeah, RPE is a pretty awesome organization. Can't say enough about them. We won something called an Open 21, so we won it in 2021. Actually, I guess we won it in 2022. We applied in 2021, but that's not the point. Yeah, RPE sort of trickles out money in $2 to $5 million chunks, and then if you win one of those, then you get to sort of swing the bat at the real prize, which is a scale-up grant. Scale-up is some acronym. Don't ask me what it stands for. RPE is very good, and it's $20 million. And we've only just recently started to think like, okay, how can we put together a request for $20 million? So being inside the RPE family has been a really great.
Yeah, and it's still operating like, hey, haven't seen a lot of changes with the new administration. Are there most of the things like still moving forward?
I think there's less money flowing out of RPE. Like we've asked RPE for like a small chunk more. Like, hey, we got a little bit more work, not a whole other grant, just kind of tack this on. I don't know if that's going to work or not. And sort of a confirmation by the proofs in the pudding in that the grants that we've won recently are state and county based. They're not federal based.
I see.
So
Got it.
there's just been less targets to shoot at.
I see. Okay, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. And then maybe last question on the team side of things is, what is your general, I guess, thesis about talent, and do you have any pieces that you would share about the evolution of that as a founder? Because again, this is your first company, so I'm really fascinated by the transformation people go through as they become founders.
Yeah. Yeah. So Steph and I, we sat down and we said, well, what's the culture of Renewal going to be? And somewhere around then, I had watched this YouTube video by this guy, pretty sure it's David Marquette. He also wrote a book called Turn the Ship Around, and he was championing the idea of what he calls distributed agency. And he tells this really fascinating story about how he was the captain of this submarine, and he had been trained for 1 year to do one submarine, and at the last minute they switched him to another one. He knew nothing about the submarine. And the first year of his captaincy was a total disaster. They had somebody come out and rate them, and they got the worst score ever. And then 1 year later, they got the best score ever. And he was like, this is the story of how we did it. I stopped telling people what to do, like Russell Crowe in Master Commander, and I started asking people what they thought we should do, and then giving intent. I want to go from here to there, and move the submarine from here to there, instead of like exactly the heading and the nautical direction and all that stuff. And so we sort of fell in love with that idea. So we searched for people that over-indexed on agency, either examples of it or a deep desire for it. So we hired one engineer out of a big defense contractor. And I'm pretty sure our whole spiel about like, hey, you're not going to be stuck in some tiny corner designing some tiny widget that you have no idea what it does or what it integrates into. You're going to get to see the whole picture, and you're going to get to make tons of decisions because there's just not enough capacity inside of my co-founder and I's head to make all the decisions for this startup. So you're going to get agency. You're going to get a ton of it. You either need to show that you've already had it and managed it well, or a deep hunger for it. And if we had any sort of guiding principle on who to pick, it was either capacity or evidence of agency.
That's good. What are some of your favorite, I guess, things that you've seen as evidence of agency?
Yeah, this is a good example. One of our engineers that we brought on early wouldn't make lots of phone calls. They would want to email somebody until they responded, and we basically said like, just pick up the phone and call them. And then now this same engineer, they are a master at calling people. Like nothing stands in the way of their determination to get an answer, they will make 100 phone calls. And we're like, yes, that is the type of tenacity that's required. That once you start to understand this is your problem, it's not anybody else's problem. Like, will the widget fit into the other widget? Will this thing, is it strong enough or is it ductile enough or whatever? It's your problem. You find an answer. And if that means you got to call 100 people, then you got to call 100 people.
Yeah, that is my one very counterintuitive Gen Z trait. I prefer to call people, and I hate having to talk to AI agents. I hate it so much. I hate also scanning. I don't like when I go to a restaurant. I do not like scanning to look at a menu online. I'm like, dude, give me a paper, and I do not also want to pay at the table. I want you to take my card. I want this to be the way it should be, in my opinion. I'm sorry, I'm kind of old school that way these days, but I kind of enjoy the actual human interaction aspect of it. But I know I said last question, but there's one more thing I'm curious about. What has been in this very early stage? What has been the hardest thing about hiring, broadly speaking?
Probably the timing of it. And what I mean is like, okay, per our very fancy Gantt chart, we need somebody on May 1st. And then you go out and you have no control of whether you're going to find somebody on and onboard them by May 1st or not. And then you start to have to ask yourself hard questions. You're like, well, how much warm body do we need and how much superstar do we need? Do we then need a person by May 1st and XYZ will suffice? Or do we wait below past May 1st, suffer the Gantt repercussions, and hold out for superstar? So it's the timing and the fact that I have very little control over the timing.
I think there's a spectrum, and I obviously as a recruiter, I tend to be like, no, no, no. There's definitely a way we can plan for that. But I guess if you're working on limited budget, I can totally understand that. I
Yeah.
think this is extremely important to recognize like what is truly matters, because most founders never differentiate the difference between like, do I just need somebody to be doing the job, or do I actually need a genuinely perfect candidate? Because there are different roles, right? Sometimes you just need somebody who can do the job, but sometimes you need a person who has genuine experience. And if you don't have that, you'll be in a tight situation. So no, I appreciate you sharing that. All right, I'm curious. Broadly speaking, what are the core macro trends that are affecting what you guys are building? I'm assuming it's the energy demand piece with AI, but what are the other macro trends and maybe regulation side of things that are either driving this or slowing the space down?
Yeah, you took away my favorite ones, but those are the most obvious, so that's fair.
Well, you can say more about that too if you want. Like, I'm curious. I am genuinely curious about the regulation side of things, because what's happening a lot right now is we see the Trump administration, come in and say anything that says climate in it or clean tech, we're going to just get rid of it, right? There's
Yeah.
Command F, get rid of all the grants, right? But then you see on the other hand, just a few. Well, I don't know when this is going to come out, but recently there was an announcement that there's a big investment into a battery company, Kemp, and that's I think $300 million or something like that. And that's completely counterintuitive to what you think that the Trump administration is doing, because there was a partnership with Japan. And it's like, okay, well, why are they doing that? Obviously, it's from the defense perspective. So there's all these convergences of interests that happen to end up helping climate. And that's why I was curious what's going on with this, because I don't know if I've ever come across turning oil wells into energy storage. So I'm curious, does anybody in the administration know about this? Are they, promoting it? Are they saying, hey, this is a good way for us to solve some of the challenges so that we can put more AI data centers on the grid?
Yeah, it's funny you use that example. That guy, the CEO of Mitrichem, Vivas, was in the same class as I was at Stanford. I sat next to him a bunch. Anyway,
He's
I
been
don't
on the
know.
pod, by the way.
I don't know if the feds know about this. I would love to believe that they would love this idea because it's so purple. It's like everybody knows we need energy storage. The feds, even the executive branch, attested to that. Actually, well, at least the legislative and the executive branch attested to that by the energy storage tax credit surviving through the one big beautiful bill,
Hmm.
whereas wind and solar, not so much.
Yeah.
And so there is some concrete evidence, but do they know about us specifically? Probably not. I would love for them to know about us because
You're
I
gonna have to
think
get a lobbyist soon. I think I know somebody for you.
that's funny. Yeah, we've never done the lobbyist thing for the DC world. We've lobbied lots of state governments. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, I would love for them to know about us because they're pretty pro oil and gas. We're bringing a solution to the oil and gas industry. They should be pretty pro grid, which I think they are. Um,
I think they are, but I also think that oftentimes they just have such bad information. So the stuff that comes out publicly, I don't know how much it differs from what's actually being done downstream of that. But the publicly stated stuff usually just seems like absolutely nonsense in some cases. I'm like, if you guys have this goal and yet you're literally shooting yourself in the foot to achieve that goal, it's just like it doesn't make sense. But
Hmm.
again, I think it comes down to bad information.
Yeah, I I don't know,
Yeah,
and I would, yeah, I guess we've never really tried to crack open the federal world very much. Maybe that's just bad strategy.
maybe. Yeah. So it sounds like in general, there's not necessarily a whole lot of activity in particular. It's just the demand of, hey, we've got issues on the grid. We need to solve those. And this is another way to solve that solution. And we've got a point of interconnection right there. That's kind of the core pieces there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is one answer to the original question that comes to mind, which not a lot of people track very closely. I don't think it's sort of an unnoticed megatrend, and that is the electrification of the oil field itself. Modern wells, most of the time, receive something called an ESP, an electric submersible pump, whereas sort of yesterday's wells, you drill them, you flow them for however long they can flow, and then you put a pump jack on it, the nodding donkey thing. And that's why there's millions of those things. But today's wells, they don't work like that. They're more stubborn, if you want to think about it that way. They can't just get pumped out casually. You got to stick something down there that's super strong. And it's basically a pump, a centrifugal pump that just rockets the oil up to the surface. And it uses about 10 times as much energy, 10 times as much power as pump jacks do. And we're talking about electrifying drilling rigs. We're talking about electrifying frac fleets, which is truly nuts because that's talking about an insane amount of power to frac a well. And they're talking about fracking multiple wells using electricity at the exact same time. So imagine, like, when I was in the industry, we would use 14 1,000 horsepower diesel trucks with pumps on the back of them to create 10,000 pounds of pressure to crack the rock to make hydraulic fracturing work. Now translate all that energy over to electricity, and you're going to do the equivalent of 14 1,000 horsepower trucks on multiple wells at the same time. That's nuts. And so you're talking about a grid that is about to strain under not just the AI supercycle, but everybody flipping over to, not everybody, the oil field flipping over
Well,
to.
if they do the drill baby drill stuff, then that is going to be a huge demand addition. That's kind of wild. I had no idea about that. I appreciate you sharing that. Wow. Well, this is quite fascinating. I would like to just kind of wrap things up here with what are you most excited for, in the next 6 to 12 months? Like, what are the core things that you guys are looking forward to and excited about?
Yeah, we are going to get to place an order for our next generation. So we've got the one system operating. I'd be lying to you if I told you if it was perfect. It's full of problems, but so it goes when you build anything for the first time. And so I'm so excited about getting my engineers the funds and the equipment to build sort of generation two, if you will, sort of unoriginally named it beta. First one. So I'm really excited to see how we can take all the mistakes we made and roll them into a much more effective design.
Yeah, no, I mean that's always the game, right? It's just like constantly getting better at it, and but getting something out the door that gets the job done. And this is like such a fine line to walk when you're building hardware that you have to kind of come in the middle there somewhere, right? It's not You're not Apple yet, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to work and it has to get out the door
Yeah.
and get the job done. So that's cool, man. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the pod and sharing what you guys are working on. Usually we don't have people on this early, but I found that this was a really unique technology I have not seen specifically before. I've heard of mechanical storage, and I think we may have had a couple on the pod, but this is unique. So I like to get people on when they have a different technology. But I appreciate you coming on and looking forward to seeing what the future brings.
Okay. All right. Pleasure chatting with you, Silas, and we have a great weekend.
You too. That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you found value in this, please share the episode with at least one other person. This is the best way for us to grow. It's through you sharing. The algorithms do help, but usually through people sharing the show is the best way for us to grow. And finally, if you need help winning grant funding, reach out to our sponsor, Climate Finance Solutions. That's climatefinancesolutions.com. And if you want help building a differentiated talent attraction system, one that's going to give you an unfair advantage over your competition, reach out to me today to learn how my firm, Earth Search, can help you. Our website is erthsearch.com. That's Earth with no A, earthsearch.com, and we can help you out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Clean Techies.